Today, we see an article from Reveal News looking at some whistleblowers from Uber who are involved in security there, saying that the company is tracking everything you do and abusing your privacy. Now, this is something we've talked about before. This is something that came up a couple of years ago. We're going to look at a document that shows just how extensively they're tracking everybody. This is something they called Rides of Glory that was on Uber's blog. Once they had a controversy with Uber executives saying they were going to dig up dirt on journalists, that was removed. But I have a copy of that blog, and I'm going to show that to you in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at this breaking news from some whistleblowers. These are internal Uber employees that say that they helped ex-boyfriends stalk their ex-girlfriends, search for trip information of celebrities such as Beyonce, and the company's former forensic investigator said this as part of a deposition that he gave under oath. This is a guy named Spangenberg, and he is quoted here in the article saying Uber's lack of security regarding its customer data was resulting in Uber employees being able to track high-profile politicians, celebrities, even personal acquaintances of Uber employees, including ex-boyfriends, girlfriends, and ex-spouses. He said this under penalty of perjury in a deposition in October. He is suing them for wrongful termination, saying that he was fired because he was a whistleblower, and also alleging age discrimination. Now, they point out in this article, after news broke 2 years ago that executives at the company were using the God View feature. Think about that. This is a company that calls itself Uber, and they create a God View to track the rides here. Do you think they've got some kind of a dangerous mentality here? I think so. And when we look at this, I want you to understand what the end game is for this. These are, as I point out many times, what they're setting up are tax and track robot taxis. They want to ban all private ownership, all freedom of movement. You will go to these companies who will work hand in glove with the government. We'll talk about how politically connected they are, the exclusions that they get that their competitors, their taxi companies, do not get. And I'm fine with cutting regulation. Believe me, I'm one of the most anti-regulation guys you'll find. But to have one level of regulation for competitors and another for the people who are politically connected at the top is not right. And the reason for that is because they're a multinational corporation and because they serve the globalist government agenda. But let's look at the details here. They say thousands of employees throughout the company, they said, could get details of where and when each customer traveled. And they also point out, they said that in addition to security vulnerabilities, Spangenberg said Uber deleted files it was legally obligated to keep. And during government raids of foreign Uber offices, he said the company remotely encrypted its computers to prevent authorities from gathering information. See, they got their Hillary going, don't they? Just like Hillary Clinton, they keep the stuff that they want, and they hide the stuff and delete it once somebody comes asking what they're really doing. But you have to understand the true problem with this is that all of these companies that are keeping digital information on you now are going to be obliged to hand this over to the government. And what the government has done with CISA, they tried it, remember, multiple times, calling it CISPA, PIPA, ACTA. They finally got it through, calling it CISA. It is there to protect the corporations that have collected all this information on you, to protect them from you, the customer, suing them for violating your privacy. Now they can turn it over to the government, and they are protected from that kind of action. And understand, as we pointed out many times as well, going back to the turn of this century, we had geospatial intelligence become the primal focus of our government. So when they say they're just looking at your metadata, that is the most damaging thing they can do. By looking at your behavior, they can put together all kinds of assumptions about you, some of which are false. So let's take a look at this Ride of Glory issue here. And I've got the document right here. And again, this was published back in March 28th of 2012. They then deleted it, but I've got a paper copy of this. What they did was they kept records of rides that people had taken, and they said, let's take a look at people who, in the wee hours of the morning, get dropped off at a location that is not their home, stay for a couple of hours, and then catch an Uber ride to go home in the wee hours of the morning. That, we think, is an overnight affair. Do you see how this assumption leads to maybe false identification for people, but also how it invades people's privacy? Uber thought nothing at all about this at the time. And in fact, they had a lot of fun with it in their blog post. What they did was they first looked at the data And they broke it down by city, as you can see here. They looked at Boston. They say Boston comes in nearly 1% of all the rides of glory throughout the country. They clearly top the list. Then comes New York with about 1/5 of that proportion, so forth and so on. Then they cross-tabulate it by the day of the year. Oh, let's look at Valentine's Day or the Comic-Con or Cinco de Mayo or whatever, or my birthday. Looking at your individual birthday and seeing if you're taking a ride of glory, according to them, having an extramarital affair in the wee hours of the morning, according to Uber. Then they even break it down by the day of the week. So they play all these different games with it. Are you creeped out yet? Are you creeped out about how easy it is for them to go in and grab this information, for them to go in and turn it over to the government, how they can piece all this stuff together and maybe have some false assumptions that they make about this? Remember that they took down this Ride of Glory blog in response to a story in 2014. It was in November. And at the time, you had a BuzzFeed journalist say that he'd been invited to a dinner with Uber executives. And the Uber executive said, well, I thought this conversation was off the record later on, but here is what he had to say. A senior executive at Uber suggested the company should consider hiring a team of opposition researchers to dig up dirt on its critics in the media, and specifically to spread details of the personal life of a female journalist who was critical of the company. Now, this was someone who was, his name was Emil Michael, and he was described by the CEO and founder of Uber as one of the top deal guys in the Valley. Sits on the board that advises the Department of Defense. How's that? See, we're back to geospatial intelligence and the government using this information. They say over dinner, he outlined the notion of spending $1 million to hire 4 top opposition researchers and 4 journalists. That team could, he said, help Uber to fight back against the press that was unfriendly to them. They'd look into, quote, your personal lives, your families, and give the media a taste of its own medicine. See, this is weaponized corporate intelligence that will be turned over to our government for pre-crime purposes. Now, when we go and look at where Uber is today, just this last couple of weeks ago, the end of November, Uber is battling in Europe to make sure they're not regulated as taxis. You would think that Uber is a taxi, wouldn't you? Oh, no. For their purposes, so they can escape the regulations so they don't have a level playing field, Uber is going to the European court trying to convince them that it is a digital service and not a transportation company. Now, as Forbes reports this is going before the European Court of Justice. They have not arrived at a decision yet. And they point out that some European courts have not been kind to Uber. They lost in Denmark. The Supreme Court there ruled that, yes, you are operating as a taxi. We all know they're operating as a taxi. Elsewhere in Europe, regulators in Germany, Belgium, France have also taken actions against the company. So what do? They do the same thing that the self-driving car companies and all of these big companies do when they lose, whether it's the people trying to sell you GMO or the people trying to control your movement. If they lose at the local level, if they lose at the state level, they get tired of fighting it there, so they go to the top. They go to the European Central Regulating Court, or they go to the federal government here in the United States, and they get special services. Why? Because their intelligence is so valuable to the government, and the government is giving them a pass on any lawsuits involved there. The saddest thing about this, I think, is how easily people give up their privacy, their freedom. At the beginning of this Forbes article, the guy said, I paid nearly $40 on Sunday for a 10-minute taxi ride from Luxembourg's airport to my home. That's why I'm hoping for a successful outcome of Uber's ongoing talks with the government to launch its services. See, selling out your freedom, not understanding where this is going, giving these people an unfair advantage over taxi companies and taxi drivers who have massive regulatory expenses that are laid upon them. That's why their costs are higher. Uber can operate at a lower cost because they don't have these regulatory issues. And understand this, that Uber's goal, as he's pointed out many times, the CEO of Uber has said that he wants to get rid of the dude in the taxi to make it cheaper and to make private ownership of automobiles go away. When he does that, your freedom to move about goes away as well. Now, this is a guy who has hired Obama's former campaign manager. Now he replaced him about a year after that with an executive from Google. He understands this is politics. And this is what Uber CEO Travis Kalanick said. He said, we're in a political campaign, and the candidate is Uber, and the opponent is an asshole named Taxi. So woven into the political machinery and the fabric that a lot of people owe him favors. Now, they're putting themselves into where they are owed the favors and they're going to use those to take away your freedom of transportation. For Infowars.com, I'm David Knight.